The framers of our Constitution were obsessed with the idea of independence. And by which I don't mean the independence of 1776. I mean the independence that began to be the center of their obsession by about 1785. For by 1785, our framers began to recognize that America was a failure, that a certain corruption had spread itself through our society, and a corruption that came from a lack of independence. A lack of independence meaning a dependence that was increasingly defining how representatives connected to their government. They were dependents. They depended on influences that were not influences that allowed them to be focused on the public good. As Jefferson described it, the dependent is one that begets subservience and venality, suffocates the germ of virtue, and prepares fit tool for the designs of ambition. It is what government had become, and they sought non-dependent representatives, independent representatives, who could seek the right answer for the right reason, and their common aim was institutions, constitutions, against that improper dependence for a proper dependence, meaning dependence upon the people alone. Now they failed in that, at least with respect to this institution of our government. They failed. The 19th century was a cesspool of corruption. Here's Daniel Webster, who at the time that he served in Congress, a Congress voting on the status of the Bank of the United States, was employed by the Bank of the United States. Here's a letter he wrote to the bank. If it be wished that my relation to the bank be continued, it may be well to send me the usual retainer. Bribery was not even a crime in Congress until 1853. The period was a period where the idea of dependence on external resources to feather your nest was natural. The 20th century was much better in that respect, but it suffered a corruption of a different form, a dependency of a different form. Not money to feather the nest of a representative, people like Randy Duke, is really the exception, and Jack Abramoff no longer rules. The dependency that existed in the 20th century was a dependency on money to secure tenure, and not the tenure at a place like Harvard, tenure at a place like this. A constant attention to money, and the money necessary to be reelected. Somewhere between 30 to 70% of their time as representatives focused on this one question: how do I get the money to come back here? A sixth sense they develop to be aware of exactly how their votes might affect the opportunity to raise money. Their second job, raising money to go back to Congress, became their first job. No Congress in the history of our Congress has worked less than this Congress, where work means doing the job of legislating as opposed to the job of raising money to come back to Congress. And that feeds the dependency that defines this generation. Now, that dependency has costs. It has costs for our democracy. From the right, it has a cost that the right needs to focus on much more. Think, for example, about this story. This is the Communications Act. It has 6 separate titles. Title 2 regulates something called telecom telephones. Title 6 regulates cable. Radically different regulatory regimes. 1994, Al Gore suggested that we take the difference in these regulatory regimes as it relates to the internet and unite them. He wanted to create Title 7. Title 7 would take DSL and cable and put it under one head, but the key defining feature of Title VII was that it would deregulate internet service. His team took this idea to Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill said, hell no. How are we going to raise money from the telecoms if we deregulate them? Now, people on the right need to increasingly recognize the architecture of government here, this kind of extortion that gets built into government as government reaches as far as it needs for the purpose of facilitating raising money to run elections. And the question for the right has got to be, how much extortion-enabling regulation is there out there? How much does it define or describe what our government is? But the harm here is not just from the perspective of the right. There's a harm that the right and the left both understand. This is the harm that this dependency does as it queers or bends the government to get the wrong answer to fundamental questions. Not hard questions, easy questions. So, for example, I spent about a decade of my life fighting one set of these questions. It was a fight that began around October 27th, 1998. Inspired by this man, Sonny Bono. Sonny Bono was the namesake for this statute, the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act, a statute which extended the term of existing and future copyrights by 20 years. Existing copyrights and future copyrights. Now, there was a policy behind this statute, and the question was, how well did that policy relate to the policy of copyright law? Which, of course, is to create incentives to produce something new. And of course, that policy then can be evaluated in relation to this statute. And as it was evaluated, the question Congress should have been asking was, did this extension of existing copyrights advance the public good? Well, this man, no lefty, a guy named Milton Friedman, analyzed this question. He agreed to join a brief in the Supreme Court attacking this statute. He said he would only join the brief if the word no-brainer existed in the brief somewhere, because so clear, even to this person from the right, was it that such an extension of copyright could make no sense of public policy at all, but apparently there were no brains here when this statute was passed. Here's an easy public policy question Congress just gets wrong. Or think about another area, increasingly a focus of my work, nutrition. There's a consensus among those who know something about this, that we eat too much of this stuff, not enough of this stuff. 2003, the World Health Organization decided it would try to do something about this, so it launched a standard to say that we should get no more than 10% of our daily caloric intake from added sugar. Well, the sugar industry, they have this sweet little logo here, they went ballistic. There they are, going ballistic. They got members in Congress to threaten to withdraw funding from the WHO if it didn't back down from its ridiculous proposition that no more than 10% of our daily caloric intake come from sugar. Here's a letter signed by Senator Larry Craig demanding that they back down from this absurd position. They wanted the government and the World Health Organization to take position that we should have 25% of our daily caloric intake come from sugar. Well, the World Health Organization didn't back down, but our government did. 2003, the Food Nutrition Board promulgated standards saying 25% of your daily caloric intake should come from sugar. So here's a balanced diet according to the United States government. You can start with Fruit Loops or M&Ms for breakfast, a glass of milk, cheeseburger for lunch, pepperoni pizza, indeed 3 slices of pepperoni pizza for dinner, and sugar cookies for dessert. That's a balanced diet, according to our government. This is, again, easy public policy question the government just gets wrong. Or most fundamentally, think about global warming, right? Of course, we all now know what the consensus had been for many years, that we're doing it. As Al Gore states it, the debate's over. There are 5 points in the consensus. Number 1, global warming is real. Number 2, we human beings are mainly responsible. Number 3, consequences are very bad. Number 4, we need to fix it quickly. And number 5, it's not too late.